There's some things I did that I wasn't, looking back on, I was like, really wish I just didn't.
The week of, I wouldn't eat as much, wouldn't drink as much.
I'd go the whole school day without eating and maybe drinking about a fourth of my water bottle, which is 32 ounces.
I didn't eat anything or drink any water that morning of. I hardly had anything the week leading up to it.
I used the wrestling method of drinking a lot of water to the point where you weren't hungry.
I had to cut salt out from my diet for 2 days.
Weigh myself about, on the low end, like once a day, and on the high end, like 5 times a day, which would be after every meal.
I would try to get all of it out of my system. I remember the day of the meet, I wouldn't eat anything.
If I did eat, I ate rice cakes or things that didn't take up. They weren't calorie dense, but they filled my stomach.
All you're thinking about is what you're putting in your mouth. Even if you're not writing it down, you're making a mental list of it.
And so I stayed in that calorie deficit, and it caused me to have traumatic mental issues.
I took laxatives too.
Start feeling the effects, and it really put a setback on how well I performed.
It's like overwhelming feeling of my stomach rumbling and stuff like that.
Because every single time I would pole vault, I would think that I would need to weigh less.
I pole vaulted for 2.5 years on Apex Friendships track team.
I was a pole vaulter at Apex High School for 3 years, and now I pole vault at Belmont Abbey College.
My sophomore season, which was my first year pole vaulting.
I was a pole vaulter for Apex High School.
Pole vault is one of the 44 events in track and field, but it was originally a practical means of clearing objects like fences. It wasn't until 1896 when pole vaulting became an Olympic event. As pole vaulting has progressed and evolved, so have the poles used to jump. So pole vaulting was not always how we know it today. It did start out with wooden poles, and then the athlete would kind of fall into a sand pit. And then poles made of bamboo, where the athlete could land on a mat, were introduced. But it wasn't until 1956 when the carbon fiber and fiberglass poles we know and love today were introduced. These poles were revolutionary as they allowed the athlete to bend the pole. Since then, the technology has just kept evolving.
If you look at how the men's pole vault world record has varied over the years, around 1920 or so to 1940, it was hanging around 4 to 4.5 meters in height. But then in 1958, fiberglass poles were introduced. Now the poles are even more advanced. The fiberglass is reinforced with carbon fiber composites, which make them extremely light and extremely flexible. So they're really good at transferring all of that initial kinetic energy into elastic potential energy and finally gravitational potential energy.
Weigh-ins.
Pole vault weigh-ins are only found in high school pole vault, nowhere else, and it's similar to the sport of wrestling where you weigh in, but instead of it determining who you compete against, it determines what poles you're allowed to use at that meet. When you enter a meet and you go to check in for the pole vault event, you will go to a table and it'll say pole vault weigh-ins with a big sign, and you will go and get weighed in. A person will write your weight down on the clipboard. Sometimes they'll write it down on a wristband that you're wearing. So this is from my freshman year. This was at States, and so as you can see, I weighed 135 that day. So they just wrote that down. You have your smallest pole in your hand with you, and they will sometimes tape all your poles or just your smallest pole, and those are the only ones you're allowed to use. The higher the flex number, the stiffer the pole.
All right, so this is a 13-foot, 150-pound pole. So if an athlete weighs 151 pounds, they would not be allowed to jump on this pole as of right now.
At this particular meet, I remember being really upset because I was on a menstrual cycle and I did weigh more than normal because you retain water or something like that. And I weighed 6 pounds more than I thought I was going to. So I could not warm up with a 130 pole. The smallest I could use was a 135 because I did weigh 135. I remember feeling super defeated because of that, and I couldn't warm up with a small pole. So I didn't have that confidence going into the meet. So I didn't do very well. And there were a number of factors playing into that. This weight was not the only reason why I didn't do well. I was 15 years old, very naive and, new to the sport. But ever since that meet, I kind of just told myself I'm never letting that happen again. I'm always going to make my way in. That kind of led to some of the unhealthy things that I described earlier that I had to do. And a lot of vaulters, unfortunately, have to do as well to make the weigh-in so they can use the pole they want to use. In order to understand the intentions behind the weigh-in rule, it's important to know the physics behind pole vaulting in itself, and physicist David Young explains this perfectly.
So Mondo starts about 40 meters back from the pit, runs as fast as he can, and in his case around 9.6 meters per second, greatly increasing his kinetic energy. He then plants the bar at takeoff, and it converts that kinetic energy into stored electrostatic potential energy in the bar. The bar then bends and acts like a loaded spring. The bar unwinds, giving him that electrostatic potential energy back into kinetic energy, and more importantly, gravitational potential energy, which then lifts him up toward the bar.
With this being said, it's clear that the pole bends based on how strong and fast the athlete is, not how much they weigh. If they're stronger and faster, it'll bend more, and if not, it'll bend less. To talk about this issue, I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to speak with Tokyo 2020 women's pole vault champion Katie Najat. Thank you so much for taking time.
Yeah, no problem. I honestly, this is something that I feel kind of strongly about.
Okay. So I understand you competed in high school. Did you have to weigh in? What years did you compete in high school?
The spring season was 2006 to 2009. We didn't have to weigh in, but we did have to tell them our weight, and then it was just like an honor system.
Right.
But I remember lying about my weight by like 5 pounds because one of my warm-up poles was, I think, like a 130 or a 135, and I weighed 140. The issue is that the flex number is the only number that matters. The weight is not, it's just a guideline. It's not, the flex is what matters, and the weight that's on there is just to kind of give you a general idea.
The flex number range might be from 19.5 to 20.9 or so. It's kind of dependent on each weight. So as you can see, even though it's labeled 150 pounds, there could be variance in the pole. So an athlete who's 151 pounds might be able to, it might be technically a 152 pound pole.
But I'll never forget my coach, Brad, who's 6'3" and almost 200 pounds. Like he grabbed the smallest pole at Washington State, which was, I think, like a 12-foot one. I don't even remember what it was. It was little. It was a tiny pole, and he jumped on it to prove that as long as you're jumping up, you don't break poles. Like poles break because either they're damaged or you're cranking on it wrong or whatever.
I was really happy Katie brought up this point about the poles breaking, because she's right. Over 95% of the time a pole breaks, it's because of some sort of external damage done to it. Usually an athlete who wears sharp track spikes steps on it and damages it, not because an athlete is pushing too hard, and certainly not because an athlete weighs too much.
Common misconception with pole breaks is that, the athlete is too heavy for the pole, so the pole breaks. That's not necessarily true. When poles are manufactured, they actually test them by basically touching the two ends of the pole together and overbending the pole. So with that being said, it shows that that's not going to break the pole.
And so I think that especially highlighted just how flawed that logic is, because if he is not breaking, the weight rating is not the issue. That's not the reason. If you weigh more than this pole, it's not going to break. There are more injuries that will happen by forcing kids on poles that are too big for them or too much for them to handle. And I think that's where the safety issue comes from. First and foremost, is if you force a kid to get on too big of a pole, that's where you see them get rejected. And
this actually seems to be common knowledge across experienced pole vault coaches and athletes.
Forcing athletes to jump on poles that are higher weighted, it's actually potentially more dangerous, because in order for the athlete to push that pole to vertical and have a successful vault, they need to be faster and stronger, which might not be the case. So sometimes jumping on a lower rated pole leads to a safer jump based on their athletic ability.
At this point, it's very clear that the weigh-in rule is dumb, but here's more evidence from another credible and experienced pole vaulting coach on why the logic is so flawed.
So if this pole is a 13,170, every 3 inches I hold down is roughly 5 pounds. So that's saying if I hold the very top of the pole, it's a 13,170. If I hold 3 inches down to 12.9, 175. Makes sense? If this is a 14.150 and this is a 13.170, the very top of the pole is a 13.170, the very top of this pole is a 14.150. According to the math, these are the exact same pole. But because of high school state league rules, someone weighing 160 cannot jump on this pole, but someone weighing 160 can jump on this pole. Which doesn't make any sense, because if you're holding at 13 feet, it's a 13.170. These are the exact same pole. But as you grip higher, then it becomes a 13.3, 165, and then it becomes a 13.6, 160, a 13.9, 155, and then we're at a 14.50. So the weight labels are stupid if you don't take the grip into account.
But I don't think they ever checked the weight in college. It was just high school, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So that's where like the confusion comes from, because if at the Olympics, like the highest of the high with meets and everything, if they know they don't need to weigh in and college doesn't have to be weighed in, why are they forcing high school girls and guys? It totally affects the guys too, to weigh in. Like, do you think it's a result of incompetence or just misunderstanding, or they genuinely think it's for our safety?
It was obviously set up by people that don't understand the sport at all. And so it's a very flawed logic. And I mean, I understand where someone who didn't get pole vaulting would see that and be like, okay, that's how we're going to keep kids safe. And girls are people, guys and girls. Like, they could, one, go to extreme lengths in terms of starving themselves to get on these poles, or for these poles to work for them, which will then make those poles stiffer. And like it's just there, that's an issue. But then also you're creating these lifelong issues of thinking you need to be lighter, leaner.
And that's why this rule is such an issue. It just makes the sport more unsafe. It's been proven countless times that rapid weight loss has extreme psychological effects, such as confusion. The last thing you need when you're 10 plus feet in the air is to be confused. In a dangerous sport like pole vaulting, a bad fall can cause paralysis. If meet officials want to promote safety, here's one of many solutions that could work.
Take your pole, take a tape measure.
Icky bam.
Take your favorite Sharpie, mark every 3 inches on your pole, and then mark what the heights are. This is a 13.170.
It's not really, it's PVC pipe, remember that.
13.170, so this would be
12.9, 6, 3, and then this would be down to 12. And then 11.9.
Great, I see this done a lot, but why don't they add the weights?
So it goes from a 13.170 to a 175 and then 195.
So you're trying to tell me somebody holding at 12 foot on this pole who weighs 180 pounds can't use this pole because why? You're afraid it's gonna break?
But we just held lower on the pole and made it stiffer, so now it's a 190.
You know, the weight label is stupid.
A rule can be in place for a long time and still be wrong or harmful or incorrect or all of the above.
Rules can change. I think there just has to be enough of a, calling for it, I guess. If it's explained in a way where it makes sense, then I think it definitely could be, but it's just going to need to be pushed. I mean, I didn't realize they were actually doing weigh-ins for vault until like probably, I don't know, a year or two ago. Like I didn't realize they were doing that. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, that's dangerous for so many reasons. Mentally, physically, emotionally.
It is not normal to only have one meal a day, and that one meal consisting of rice cakes. And it is not normal for a 15-year-old to completely cut salt out of her diet. It is not normal to weigh yourself 5 times a day. It's not normal to eat nothing all day before you compete. And it is certainly not normal that almost every female pole vaulter I know has experienced an eating disorder at one point or another. This rule should be abolished nationwide, but it's not that easy. I do think that one state should do it first, and the others can see how it doesn't really affect anyone at all or anyone's safety. And I would be so incredibly happy if my own state were the first one to do that. I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that the NCHSAA started or created this weigh-in rule, but it would be amazing if they were one of the first ones to get rid of it.